At 6:14 a.m., the soybean silo stood untouched, full to the top, and worthless. Just a week earlier, that same North Dakota elevator had been loaded, 30,000 bushels ready for a Chinese cargo that never came. Now it sat silent. No trucks, no buyers, no China. Across the Midwest, railcars were parked, cattle lots were half full, and in the USDA's grain export dashboard, 0 new soybean orders from China, 0 for corn, 0 for wheat. So why, this same week, did the U.S. Farmer Sentiment Index hit a 4-year high? Secretary Tom Vilsack was flying to Vietnam when the latest ag economy barometer dropped. It showed something startling. 61% of U.S. farmers expect good times ahead, not survival, not modest recovery, optimism. This despite China, the world's largest agricultural importer, refusing to book a single grain shipment from the U.S. for the rest of the year. In 2022, China bought $36.4 billion in American agricultural goods. In 2024, that figure collapsed. Soybean exports to China alone dropped 12.3% year over year, according to USDA data. And now, the pipeline is dry. Brazil, meanwhile, is booming. Chinese customs data shows that soybean imports from Brazil rose 27% in the first half of 2025. Argentina just secured a $900 million food export agreement with Beijing. And Russia. Off-book shipments of wheat and corn are flowing overland into China through Siberian rail. These volumes aren't tracked on Western exchanges, making them invisible, but effective. Still, American farmers say they're hopeful. Not because they've replaced China, but because they believe they will. But the numbers say otherwise. In 2023, China absorbed 49% of total U.S. soybean exports, 13% of meat and poultry, and a double-digit share of dairy. Now that demand has reoriented toward Latin America, there's a hole no other buyer has yet filled. Vilsack is now courting Vietnam, India, and Peru, hoping to diversify U.S. farm exports. But even if all three tripled their purchases overnight, they wouldn't match what was lost from China. According to the American Farm Bureau, the U.S. is short by over $8 billion in ag export revenues compared to 2022 levels. Meanwhile, Brazilian producers are reaping the upside. CEPIA data shows soybean premiums at Brazilian ports have jumped 70% since China began redirecting orders. The premium reached 85 cents per bushel in March, highest since 2020. In meat, Brazil's beef exports to China surged 33% in the first quarter of 2025 alone. Poultry exports climbed 20%. And here's the kicker. Brazil hasn't faced the bird flu outbreaks plaguing U.S. suppliers. That gives it an edge beyond just pricing. So, if the market fundamentals are collapsing, where is the optimism coming from? According to Purdue University's ag economist James Mintert, it may not be about markets at all. New data from the USDA shows that median U.S. farm income, after expenses, was $0 in 2023, and yet total household income remained stable. Because, well, 71% of that income came from non-farm sources. Let that sink in for a second. Most American farmers aren't surviving because of their crops. They're surviving despite them. The optimism isn't rooted in exports, yields, or prices. It's based on the realization that farming is no longer the business model. The real income is coming from energy leases, off-farm jobs, government subsidies, and asset appreciation. The dirt isn't feeding China. It's feeding the portfolio. This shift is visible in USDA's 2024 household income breakdown. Among soybean farmers, only 29% of household income came from actual soybean production. For beef and poultry producers, the figure drops even further. Only dairy farmers, who are increasingly consolidated into mega coops, show a majority of income from direct agricultural activity. And the land itself is often more valuable as collateral than as farmland. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, farmland values rose 12% in 2024, even as commodity revenues fell. Meanwhile, Brazil and Argentina aren't just gaining ground. They're building infrastructure with Chinese capital to make it permanent. Chinese state firms are funding Brazil's Fiol Railway to connect the soybean heartland directly to Atlantic ports. Chinese-built terminals in northern Brazil now dominate grain shipping lanes. In 2023, Brazil shipped more soybeans to China than the United States did in 2017, America's peak year. That's not a temporary pivot. That's realignment. And this realignment isn't just agricultural. Chinese companies now control roughly 10% of Brazil's electricity grid, according to the Wilson Center. They've built satellite tracking stations in Argentina, funded port expansions in Peru, and are investing in rail corridors to export lithium and iron ore from the interior of South America. Each project reduces U.S. leverage and offers China a regional hedge. American farmers may not see it, but the broader arc is clear. Beijing isn't just boycotting U.S. crops. It's bypassing U.S. power. Yet inside the United States, small business optimism ticked up in May, led by the agriculture sector. Part of that may be psychological. With Trump re-elected and signaling aggressive tariff retaliations, some farmers see hope for subsidies, protection, or reciprocal tariffs. But history complicates that belief. During Trump's first term, retaliatory tariffs from China cost U.S. farmers $26 billion in lost exports, according to the USDA. Emergency bailouts kept many afloat, but they didn't change the structural losses. Ironically, the very tariffs that were supposed to protect American farmers are now giving Brazil a real strategic edge. As the United States puts new duties on Chinese imports, China is doubling down on Brazil instead. The Wall Street Journal actually reported that Chinese buyers had already pre-booked nearly all of Brazil's soybean supply for the first quarter of 2025, even before a single ship left port. Meanwhile, American soybeans were just sitting there, untouched, in the Gulf of Mexico. Even some of the big grain elevators in the U.S. are acknowledging this shift. For example, CHS Incorporated, a major American agricultural cooperative, has cut its export guidance by 15% for the second half of 2025. So, we find ourselves back at this contradiction, a collapsing trade pipeline, but also somehow rising optimism. On one hand, it might seem like cognitive dissonance. On the other, maybe it's actually a kind of rational detachment. Farmers could be starting to see themselves less as exporters, and more as landowners, subsidy beneficiaries, and energy leaseholders. In fact, Bloomberg says there's been a 38% jump in solar leasing contracts on farmland since 2022, and wind energy royalties are going up too. In some places, like parts of Iowa and Texas, farmers are actually earning more from wind turbines than from growing corn. But there's also a geopolitical layer. U.S. officials have warned that China's investments in Latin America, particularly ports, rail, and digital infrastructure, carry military implications. The Pentagon raised alarms about the deepwater port China financed in Peru and the satellite facility in Neuquén, Argentina. Agriculture isn't just about trade, it's about control. If China can feed itself without the U.S., then the U.S. loses more than exports. It loses leverage. In that context, optimism becomes a national security blind spot. The U.S. may be betting on resilience, but the global system is tilting away from it. And while American producers look inward, Brazil looks outward. It's building the roads, signing the deals, and taking the market share. In 2025, Brazil became the largest poultry exporter to Japan, displacing the U.S., a position it had held since 2003. Japan was America's fallback after China. Now, even that's gone. Meanwhile, China is accelerating agricultural innovation. According to the Financial Times, Chinese biotech firms are investing heavily in soybean genome editing to reduce reliance on foreign seed varieties. Simultaneously, Chinese state banks are offering low-interest financing to domestic farmers to expand acreage in Xinjiang and Heilongjiang, regions once thought too marginal for high-volume production. This isn't just decoupling, it's domestication. In June 2025, India quietly overtook the U.S. as China's third-largest ag trade partner, despite historic border tensions. According to Chinese customs data, Beijing signed $1.2 billion in new contracts for Indian rice, sugar, and aquaculture. This flips a decades-old belief that countries won't trade with their enemies. China's proving the opposite. If it feeds the economy, it doesn't matter who's on the border. Meanwhile, Mexico has become an unexpected beneficiary. U.S. pork processors, facing lost Chinese demand and rising cold storage inventories, rerouted exports south. But Mexican buyers, seeing leverage, demanded price concessions. According to the National Pork Producers Council, American producers accepted up to 18% lower prices just to move product off their books. The contradiction deepens. Even U.S. allies are now exploiting American oversupply. Yet Washington's 2025 Farm Bill includes $28 billion in new crop insurance subsidies, designed to stabilize incomes, not restore market access. The policy rewards acreage, not sales. That means a farmer can plant, fail to export, and still collect. This creates a new distortion, production divorced from demand. And as domestic subsidies rise, international confidence in U.S. agricultural reliability weakens. In a recent report, the OECD warned that U.S. food exports may become structurally volatile due to the politicization of trade policy. In other words, it's not just China that's hedging against America. It's the entire global food supply chain, reconfiguring in real time. And the U.S. farmer's optimism? It may not be confidence in exports returning. It may be faith that Washington will keep paying them not to sell. The American farmer isn't betting on exports. They're betting on Washington. And they may be right, because for the first time in half a century, the world is learning how to eat without them. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.